Hell. Oh, well, now I forgot what I wanted to say. So much for a perfect show today. Whenever you're starting a show and something like this happens, well, it's less than perfect. And that really, really bothers some people. If they are not living up to their standards, to their perfect standards, the world falls apart. And that can be a huge, huge issue, right? So, welcome to PitchZone. Today we are going to talk about perfection versus excellence. And of course, these are just labels, and everybody has a different idea what's behind those labels, what these labels mean for them. And that's exactly what we are going to talk about today. That's our group of coaches, professional coaches. The first one, Nathan Gold. Nathan, how are you today?
Hello. Doing great, thanks. We got a beautiful sunny day here in Northern California, and I'm looking forward to this episode.
That sounds like perfect weather.
For some people, they would call that perfect weather. I would personally call it excellent weather.
All right, all right. As a matter of fact, Nathan, and I'm going to date you and me right now a little bit because you took me aside 25 years ago, a quarter century ago, and you tried to tell me that it's probably better if you shoot for excellence rather than perfection, because you realized I was the eternal perfectionist. And I'm not sure if that message really, really landed where it should have, because even today, I consider myself somewhat of a perfectionist, right? And I have my reasons for that. So I'm looking forward to the discussion that we are going to have. Let me bring in coach number 2, Scottie Spurzem. Scottie, you're joining us from San Francisco as well.
Yeah.
Let me ask you right off the bat, where do you stand? Are you more of a perfectionist, or do you rather embrace excellence?
I think I'm actually a perfectionist, and I'm
good.
working on always embracing excellence.
Ooh, I love it, I love it, I love it. Who knows, maybe something will happen during this 45-minute discussion that we have, and who knows? Let's bring in someone else that I think is possibly a little bit of a closet perfectionist. Coach number 3, Stuart Pink. Stuart, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to see everyone. Yes, Claudia, I think you hit the nail on the head. I've been working on my perfectionism for a long time, and I think I'm striving to be excellent, not perfect. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Yeah, me too. Definitely me too. And you were just telling us before the show started that your book is pretty much complete now. And of course, writing a book, that pretty much tests whether you're a perfectionist or whether you're going for excellence. And that's the reason why I thought you might be a bit of a closet perfectionist, because I read the book, in the meantime, it's about 2-3 months ago, and I thought it was excellent. But of course, during the next 2-3 months, you probably moved closer to perfect.
That's right. Yes, I've still been working on it, and even in the last week, I thought, okay, it is good enough now. I mean, it's going to go out there. It will be out there for all time. So I wanted it to be as good as it possibly could be. But I could spend the rest of my life just tweaking tiny things. And there's a sort of a point of return where it can't be worth it anymore. And you need to just produce something. But yeah, fascinating debate,
Indeed.
really.
Indeed. And I think that's the crux behind it, right? That the perfectionism is a productivity killer, or at least it slows down the progress that we're making naturally. So before we really get into it, let me also say hi to our viewers on YouTube online. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. Massimo is joining us here. Good thing about books, once it's on paper, it's done. Software, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, can always be updated. Yes, yes, indeed. So let me get this started with your own personal definitions of perfection or perfectionism. Stuart, what is your personal definition of perfectionism? Because perfectionism is not really a thing, right? It's a process behind it. Whenever we are looking at a noun like perfectionism, we are looking at a word that comes originally from a process, from a verb, right? To perfect something. So what is your personal definition, Stuart?
Yeah, so in terms of how perfectionism applies to me, I suppose on some level it's doing the very best that I can. And I've always tried really hard at most things that I do. But I guess where the difference with the excellence, I think perfectionism, there's never actually a finishing point. If you're running down a track, that track goes on forever. And so it's almost like the finishing point for me will eventually be determined by something else, like a deadline, or I just cannot go on anymore with this. This needs to be good enough at this point. But I suppose in the meantime, what I've tried to do is run as far down that track as it's possible to run. And as I say, we'll talk about excellence in a minute, but for me, perfectionism is that it's that goal that I can probably never reach, but that's not to say it's not worthwhile heading as far as I can in that direction.
I love it. I so love it. Now, same question to you, Scottie. You said before that you are somewhat of a perfectionist, but you're working on, embracing excellence more.
Excellent.
What exactly does perfectionism mean to you?
I think it means having everything done in a perfect manner according to my own standard or my own expectation of what is going to be perfect or what is perfect. Whereas excellence, on the other hand, is if you hit the mark with your audience or if you finish the project and it's well done. Good enough, kind of what Stuart was saying about the book. It's as good as it can be at this moment in time, and then you need to go on to production. So, I mean, even when you're painting a room or redoing a kitchen or, updating something, smooth wall, which is one of the terms for painting a wall. It can be very, very smooth or it cannot be so smooth. Smooth wall, which a lot of people want, shows every single imperfection in the drywall and also any kind of a mark or a scuff as well. So like the smooth wall needs to be perfect when it's done, but it also is going to show all of the the imperfections, no matter what. So yeah, I try to think of analogies around those things that are real and concrete that I can see. And it's like, but the smooth wall, I don't really notice the imperfections anymore. When it was first done, I noticed everything that wasn't quite right. But then I got used to it and it was perfect. It actually turned out to be perfect, even though I could still see the imperfections.
Wow, nice distinction there. Very nice distinction. And what about you, Nathan? What are your definitions? Perfection versus excellence.
Well, for me, it's very easy because it goes back to my family values that I was brought up with. And in my youth, my dad demanded perfection. My mom demanded excellence. They didn't call it that back then, but over the years of being away from the coast, I realized that was the life I was living. Perfection is doing it perfect, whatever that it is, whether it's a sport that you get 10 out of 10, which is a perfect score, or it's an exam where you get a 100 or you get an A, or it's a plumbing job, an electrician's job, a surgery. Those things better be perfect or you're going to have problems. So I think when it comes to perfection, it's important for certain things to strive for perfection and achieve that perfection or as close to it as possible. I'll get to the excellence part of it and my mom's part of it when we get to the next definition.
Well, no, just continue, Nathan. Continue. What is your definition of excellence?
Okay, so my mom always said, don't listen to your dad, especially when it came to the things that she felt. It's not important to be perfect. It's important to do your best. That's what she do your best. If you do your best, you can go to sleep at night feeling good about your efforts. So I translated doing your best into striving for excellence. And I like the word better for me because it feels like it's achievable. We know in our hearts, we know in our bodies and our minds when we've achieved excellence in a talk, in a Q&A session, in maybe just bumping into somebody one day and they're having a problem and something came up and you said something and boy, that was just the excellent words to use at that moment. Perfect? I don't know. I just personally like the excellence because it makes it easier on my psyche to achieve excellence versus perfection. When I think of perfection, unless it's what I've identified already, I think in terms of the gray zone, perfection is very hard to define. And that's the problem. It's up to us to define what perfection means to us, unless your parents have demanded perfection, which we're still living today.
I love these distinctions. Absolutely love them. And you mentioned sports before. And I think in sports, it really becomes obvious, right? If you're looking at some of the sports like figure skating or gymnastics, right? Those kind of sports where you have judges. Of course, you practice. If you are going to the Olympics, you're shooting for perfection. You want that performance be absolutely perfect. And I always say, if you do miss the mark somehow, if you're shooting for perfection but you miss the mark, you're probably still ending up with excellence. But if you're shooting for excellence and you're missing the mark, all of a sudden you're ending up with mediocrity, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about presenting and pitching, it's kind of similar to that Olympic performance. In some cases, if you're going to a contest, a pitch contest, right? So what are your takes on that when it comes to presentations? Not just in your life, doing things where you say, okay, I'm going to do it excellently or I'm shooting for perfection, but specifically related to presentations. Who wants to take that one?
Well, can I just add on to something that Nathan was saying, which is about perfection, especially when we come to presentations. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect presentation. And I say that simply because no matter how good, how amazing something is, there will always be a way to improve it. And I think there may even be a cultural thing here, because it's interesting. I obviously got educated in the UK. And I did very well at school. We had far fewer multiple choice tests than I think exist in America. But to be an A student in the UK, you could be getting 75%, 80% on written essays. Those grades in America are not so good, to put it mildly. But I think it's a cultural difference. I think the education I was receiving was training me to realize, first of all, perfection is probably impossible, but secondly, there's always a lot of room for improvement. And so I'm very happy with that. And I wonder sometimes about the education my kids are receiving here, where you're being trained to think that nothing less than in the 90s is acceptable, how healthy that is as an attitude. But when we come to presenting, there's another thing to be very careful about if you're striving for perfection, which is that can damage your confidence. Because if you're striving for perfection and you think, I haven't yet got it perfect, then you can start to panic, and then starting to panic can affect everything. So I think, especially when you're getting ready to actually present, it can be quite useful to lower the bar a bit. And yeah, excellence I like. Perfection, you don't want to be damaging your self-confidence before going in to present.
Yeah. And honestly, oh, sorry. That goes to speaking up in a second language or in a fifth language as well. I think there are some cultural norms where and I would think maybe mostly in Europe and in Asia, I get the sense that you have to know everything buttoned down. It has to be perfect before you're going to speak. And that also can be considered I mean, I look at it as a mindset opportunity to change when you're dealing with other cultures, that you need to shift your mindset into the culture that you're working with as well. And here we want to hear from people, even if they don't say it as clearly as they might wish they had. So
I like that distinction, the cultural distinction, because, I'm Swiss. What are the Swiss known for, right? It's the perfectionism when it comes to creating watches, for example. Yeah, absolutely, right? It's it's definitely cultural upbringing. I was taught from a very young age, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing it right? And with that, the right is not just doing it excellently, but really hitting the nail on its head. And so, yeah, let's turn very, very briefly to a couple comments, because there are some interesting thoughts here that Massimo and Samantha is joining us here today as well. Samantha, hello, and Kevin have. So let's start with Massimo's. In pitches, I think it's easier to agree that they are excellent rather than agreeing on them being perfect. Absolutely. So for this reason, I would choose excellence for my pitches. In theory, I love that. And Samantha makes a nice distinction here as well. Excellence is trying to do your best, and perfectionism is trying to do the best, which nobody can agree on what makes perfect, right? So I love that. Absolutely great. And Kevin, many say good is good enough. But how does that relate to healthcare, right? Would you like to be treated by a doctor that looks you in the eyes and says, I embrace excellence, so now it's okay, it's good enough, right? No, you probably would demand some level of perfection here. Doing your best needs to be considered in the context of self-care. To me, then you can be perfect only on something digital, 0 or 1, true or false. Yeah, how do you measure it? And yes, hello, Samantha, glad to have you here today. So, any of these comments, what do they trigger for any of you? Nathan, Stuart, Scottie. Yes, Scottie.
I'll hop in here just from the English language perspective. I actually looked them up just to see what the synonyms were. And interestingly enough, and I wrote a couple notes down here, they're both nouns, but perfection can also be a transitive verb. And when you look at synonyms, excellence had synonyms of merit, virtue, perfection, and excellence. Perfection synonym was referred to excellence. There's some other ones in the dictionary definitions, but I thought that was interesting. They're almost the same thing depending on how you view them. So I think part of what the issue for us as presenters is how do we manage both angles, right? How do we do an excellent job and perfect what we want to say? It may not have to be perfect, but we can perfect the message and we can perfect our understanding of our audience. So you can do a lot of research and do the best you can at the time. And that will lead you to perfection without being too hard on yourself. Now I'm talking in circles. But one more thing, they both come, which I thought was interesting because I'm doing a little more research on etymology. They both come from Middle English and Latin, but perfection comes from Old French and excellence comes from Middle French. And what that means is as the languages evolved, old languages were a certain period of time, Middle transitioned into current modern day. Latin, I think, has remained the same. I may be wrong, but I believe it's remained relatively the same over the years. So curious, just to me, it's curious that they both came from these three language families. So they're very similar. And there were probably, I'm guessing, cultural issues around the time that language was being written between the Greeks and the Romans and the other people who were writing down words at the time in the Western word world, I guess. So just thought I'd add those things.
Yeah, and back to what Stuart was mentioning about cultural. I think this is true. I hope it's true, but for many years I've always had this in my mind that I heard this somewhere, and I hope I'm correct in this, that the American Indians, when they produce a product, you know, a dream catcher or anything that they're selling, or pottery, they always make a mistake on purpose, because they don't believe that they can achieve perfection as human beings because of the religious aspects that some people have in life. So I'm not here to talk about religion, because we don't want to get into that area of trying to define perfection in religion. But I do want to say that Stuart brought up one of the things that reminded me of a story from a long time ago, and I hope you don't mind if I share this right now. Is it all right? Yeah, okay. So he said that you can, if you're striving for perfection as a presenter and you go up with that in mind, it could damage your confidence. Well, I can tell you, it could also backfire on the audience, meaning it could drop their confidence in you. And I can tell you this as if it was yesterday. It was literally September of 1982. I was asked to go over to the UK from San Diego on an overnight flight to do a fourth demo to a company that said, no, we don't want your software. It doesn't do what we do. Long story short, we show up, we get all the kits all set up. And this was in the days when we had a 300 baud modem to connect back to San Diego. Actually, that day it was a 2400 baud modem, an acoustic coupler with one of those. Anyway, long story short, the vice president of the company is there. He's the decision maker, and his minions are around, and I get the stage. Okay, Nathan, let's do the demo. And I took the time to talk to the VP beforehand, and I asked him, what exactly do you want our software to do? And he showed me. So I said, okay, thank you very much. And I sat down at the demo. I did a perfect, I mean, it was perfect demo. Nothing went wrong. The connection stayed up. I knew where to, it was perfect. We get done. They say, okay, if what he said works, then you got the deal. We all get up, we close up our kit, we're walking out, and the VP calls me over. He says, Nathan, come here for a minute. I want to talk to you. And I tell you, I remember this like it was yesterday. He says, he's a 6'5" guy. He leans down to me. He says, Nathan, I got to tell you, that was the most perfect demo I think I've ever seen in my whole software career. But I got to tell you, it was so perfect. I'm not so sure I believe everything you said. What? I'm the tech guy. He says, relax. I know everything you told me was true. And you can prove it, but it didn't sound true. So I took that lesson away as I will never do a perfect demo again in my life. And from that day on, I actually made mistakes in demos just to avoid perfection, because I had to get my head out. No, you don't need to do. We had competitions at our company. Who could do the more perfect demo? And I was at the top of that list. I had to maintain that number one position, but I gave it up. And just went for excellence. And I made mistakes, and I became more human, more real with people. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's worked for 41 years.
And that's exactly the story you told me 25 years ago when you tried to convince me to, relax a little bit, take the Swissness out of you or whatever it was, right? But then I'm wondering, what is it that we remember better? A perfect performance where you just go like, the audience is so in awe because it's just flawless, right? Or do we remember those presentations better that have a little hiccup here and there, and maybe we do both. I don't know. What are your takes, Stuart, Scottie?
Absolutely. I think it's the imperfections that make presentations real. I remember once watching, it was an interview that had been rehearsed between two people, and it started off perfectly and it was completely unmemorable until someone forgot something that they'd rehearsed, and that was the moment that they became human and relatable, and it was funny, and suddenly everyone was engaged. It was much, much more interesting. So I absolutely think it's important on that level to be human and relatable. I wonder if I could just jump in here, because we've been talking a lot about definitions, and when we think about excellence, I think, Claudia, you implied if you don't have excellence, you have mediocrity. But to me, what comes before excellence is competence. And I think that if someone's watching this right now and thinking, I've just got to give a presentation for the first time, I'm pitching for the first time, and you're telling me it's excellence or perfection, they both sound intimidating to me. I think the starting place is competence. Everyone needs to be competent. That means doing what it is that's required of you, knowing your material, and there's plenty of room for imperfections in that. I liken competence to when you first start driving. It's not crashing the car and getting to your destination, and then excellence is perhaps getting there in style. But I think competence is a bare minimum for presenting, and then once you've got that down, then start to think, okay, how can I make this better? Thinking about your audience, what do they need from me? What's the best way I can present it, the most impactful way I can present it? And all of that certainly has room for imperfections from people.
Also, when it comes to presentations, I think really people are looking for authenticity. And even in this era of the beginning of Chat GPT, I had a really interesting conversation with a client about this a couple of days ago. And I think people are going to start seeing through the presentations and the things that are completely generated by an autonomous computer and not by you, not by a person, because it's obvious. I mean, it will be obvious that it's not authentic, that it's not you. And honestly, we all make mistakes, and in the presenting world, it's okay. I mean, it makes you who you are, and it even goes to the investing world. And I'd be curious to know what the audience thinks about this as well. But when I was doing investor relations consulting work, I viewed it, and I view a lot of presenting actually when you're pitching something that nobody else knows anything about, because you're the expert and you're doing something novel. You are learning to affirm or correct perceptions about your competency, right? Or about whatever the product is that you're selling. So the way you deal with your errors is also a way that you show your audience or your investors what you're made of, how you're going to react when things go bad and when things go good, when things go well. But when things go bad, you get a more generous audience when they are familiar with you and they know that you can handle an error elegantly
Even
or
when-
graciously, or just say that you made an error and work forward to correct it. So
even when it's the first time, we all are in first time situations. Like Stuart mentioned a moment ago, we're trying new things, we're doing a new talk, we're trying new taglines or whatever. It's okay to just go out there and not necessarily have an excellent result or a perfect result, but just knowing how to think on your feet in that first time situation can be the defining moment between people walking out thinking, wow, that was really excellent, versus a total failure. Even if it's your first time, your first anything. Because if you have the ability to think on your feet and deal with things that don't go exactly as planned, or something happens in the audience, somebody makes a noise and it's like perfectly timed. And I do mean perfectly timed. See, that's the difference. Sometimes the word perfect is allowable in my life, whereas other times I make a clear distinction between perfection and excellence. But to Claudio's point where we began this whole talk, I totally believe that an excellent or perfect presentation, whatever you want to call it, is the one that that has deep emotional connections with your audience. That's how I rate an excellent or even a perfect presentation. You get into the hearts of your audience, either one of those words will work for me.
And that's exactly it. Because, again, we are giving the definition or the meaning to these words ourselves. And as long as the end result is there, who cares whether you call it, wow, this was a perfect pitch or this was an excellent pitch, right? One thing, though, that when I look out into the world, sometimes I wonder, I see a lot of quality that I consider to be subpar. And I just recently actually had a discussion with a friend who forwarded me a LinkedIn post or a website that somebody did and said, look at all these typos on here. This is unbelievable. And I said, well, I think in this case, the author may just want to signal that they wrote it themselves and it wasn't written by ChatGPT, right? Because ChatGPT is really, there's never a typo in there, there's nothing. And so I have started, I'm embracing ChatGPT quite a bit, and I have actually started to put the typo here and there in just so that it's not too transparent that I'm using ChatGPT a lot as my personal digital assistant. So what do you think? Does this entire, I'm a recovering perfectionist and perfectionism is the death of productivity and so on, does that lead to a diminishing quality overall, perhaps?
I mean, can I say...
Sometimes.
I'd like to share... Go on, Scottie.
No, I was just going to say, I would say sometimes it does. It's not linear. Life isn't linear. Presentations aren't linear. It's not a mathematical equation, which those need to be perfect for engineering purposes. But in terms of communication with other human beings, it's not linear, and it's never going to be. So, sorry, that would be my thing.
Yeah, I wanted to share a story. I think in some ways perfection is a luxury. And so one way I sometimes think about it is if I'm going to get the opportunity to give a speech multiple times, there's an opportunity to really work on something. And I remember I had a speech many years ago about a story of the time I was nearly killed by a grizzly bear in Yellowstone National Park. And I thought at some point in this speech, there's clearly a play on words between bear, in the sense of the animal that nearly killed me, and barely survived. And I thought, okay, because it's been a lot of drama here, how can I fit this in? And so the first version of that speech, I said, I barely survived. And even though I really emphasized the word, no one in the audience reacted to it. And I thought, okay, come on, I'm giving this speech again. I know there's something here. And then I remembered that often in a sentence, you want to put the most important word at the end, because that's the word that lingers in the audience's mind. So I changed the word order around. And next time I said, I survived. Barely. And this time it got a bit of a reaction. It got a few laughs. I thought, good. I thought, but yeah, it's not perfect. There's more here. I know there's more here. How do I make this correct? And it was the third time where I finally cracked it. Because after all the drama of relating the story, I asked the question, how did I survive? Barely. And it wrong-footed the audience. It tricked them. They weren't expecting the answer. And the whole audience burst out laughing. And so that's an example. Very, very simple changes. But I had the opportunity to make it perfect, and it was well worth it for me. So I think anytime that you get the chance to do something again, that's when maybe you can allow yourself the luxury of trying for perfection.
Lovely, lovely. And in this case here, you just also demonstrated the power of putting the funny bit last. Humor really thrives on that, right? If you have something really, really funny, if you put the funny bit, the funny word at the end, and in your case, you saw it in your third iteration, if you have a nice little pause before that, it really, really hits, right? So, last question, because we are already almost coming to the end of today's episode. Last question to all of you. How do you embrace excellence? For those that have not even considered, that that's an option. They just go like, okay, I have to get this perfect, otherwise it sucks. But no, there is that excellence, and that's the third one that I love that Stuart introduced, the competence, right? But how do you get somebody to embrace excellence so that the quality is there, and for them it's an encouraging and motivating kind of state of mind that they can have when they know that their end results are going to be excellent?
Well, I'd be happy to start with that one. I would simply recommend that we, all of us, hold ourselves to a high standard. You set the standard, whether it's comparing it to someone or something else. And you don't even have to make it public, but holding yourself to a high standard and working towards preparing for that, whatever performance, talk, or whatever you're doing, is key. And I feel like if all we did was just aim for that high standard you're going for and prepare with beyond measure, you'll be able to achieve excellence, and perhaps for some people, what they define as perfection. And I'll leave you with a quote that I use with my clients to get them to practice and prepare. Because in my business, that is the hardest thing to get people to do, is practice out loud. And Bernard Asuncion has this quote that says, practice like you've never won and perform like you've never lost.
Nice one. Nice. Scottie?
Well, I was thinking again, back to what Stuart said about competence. I guess to me, that's the first perfectionism bar that I always have to cross personally. It's like, where do I feel like my competence level is where I need it to be to then go out and do this next thing, right? To do the presentation or to do the social media clip, whatever it is. And I think letting go of it having to be perfect is the key for some people. And I don't know about any of you, but I know men and women both can sort of suffer from the imposter syndrome. It's not good enough. Why me? I'm not sure am I really good enough to be doing this thing? Why do they want to listen to me? And putting that somewhere else, like trying to let that naggly voice in your head, put it in a suitcase in the back of the bus or underneath the bus for storage. It'll always be near you, but to push it aside, and then be confident going. It's hard, it's a real push me pull you to me. So I think I'm freezing.
Stuart?
Yeah, so I think one mistake a lot of beginning speakers make is they're presenting and they think, well, let me just tell you everything I know about a subject, which is understandable if you don't have experience, but it comes back to what Nathan was saying about the preparation. If you're an expert on something, to me, excellence is doing the work, first of all, to realize out of your breadth of experience and knowledge, what is it that you have of value to share with your audience? And then the second piece is to simplify it and clarify it, to make it as clear a message or lesson or whatever it may be, so that your audience really understands it. And that's something that only the true expert can do. So that, to me, would be my definition of excellence, really.
And I almost forgot, thank you, Stuart and Scottie, for that. I almost forgot there's one more story. I hope we have time to, yes, we do. We have time to share. Because it really illustrates how I believe excellence is what to go for versus perfection, especially when you're on stage or presenting, which is a lot of what you you cats here and our audience do. We're trying to figure out ways to be better when we're communicating. So I was on a stage. It was like a TED-like stage, and every speaker had 15 minutes. I was the one just before lunch. I go up, I do my thing. I'm in minute 12. I'm closing. I'm getting to the point where I say, these are the 3 things to do. Number 1, blah, 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 blah. Number 2, number 3, blah, 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 blah. As soon as I said number 3, and folks, I had been saying those 1, 2, and 3s for years. I don't know why I blanked. I literally blanked. As soon as I start saying number 3, of course, I remember number 2. It's not that hard. So I get through number 3 and I said, oh yeah, number 2 is blah, 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 blah. Thank you very much. Boom, 14 minutes and 57 seconds. Walk off the stage, lunchtime. People coming up to me. There were a bunch of people in the room that knew me. They come up and they said, Nathan, come on. You didn't forget that last thing, did you? I said, no, I really did. So people think that someone like me that does presentations all the time, every time, and that was a presentation I had given at least 50 times before. So it was well rehearsed, well practiced, quite perfect in its delivery. But I made a mistake. I made a blunder, or I forgot something. And you know, the audience at that moment, I felt like at that moment I was having an Anthony Robbins experience, meaning, holy crap, this is perfect. And uh-oh. So I realized it's okay, because that's the moment where the audience is like, oh my God, come on, you can do it. And it builds a better emotional connection, so long as you don't crumble and run off the stage like a coward. I'm done.
And it makes you authentic, and it makes you more authentic. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And crumbling and running off stage, you know, we've seen examples of that, of course. And thank you so much for sharing this story here. What a perfect story to end this session here today about perfection versus excellence. Thank you, coaches. As always, really appreciate your insights, your different opinions. And I think Kevin, he added one comment here that I want to quickly bring up, because I think it's such a perfect thing to end today's episode. A gardener prepared a perfect garden and then shook the cherry tree and shed the blossom on the floor. Sometimes imperfection goes beyond perfection. Thanks so much for watching. Wherever you are in the world, have a great morning, afternoon, evening, and we shall see each other again next week. Have fun. Bye-bye.